All right, so I get the honor of introducing PETA and the best dressed team at the University of Michigan, Michigan Ethics Bowl team. Can you guys hear me? Got this microphone? Yeah. All right, so can you guys do me a favor? Can you raise your hand if you've ever gotten into an argument before? Yeah? Every single person in this room. So my freshman year, me and my roommates, there was 4 of us, we argued all the time, like over what classes to take, over what we wanted to eat for dinner, for lunch, whatever it was. We were always arguing. And there was always a point in our conversations, and I would call them our debates, our arguments, where someone would say, you know what, let's agree to disagree. And we'd all say, okay, fine. It would save us the trouble of having to continue arguing and ruin our friendships. But we always got to that tipping point. And I remember like the first day of classes when I was here, one of my roommates came back and I was like, hey, Matt, how was your classes today? Like, what did you think? And he said, Zach, I love all of them but one. One of these teachers is crazy. I'm never going back to that class again. And I was like, oh, all right, crazy. I don't know if that's the word. But at the University of Michigan, we definitely encourage crazy ideas. I'm sure everyone here has heard of TEDx U of M. Their tagline is encouraging crazy ideas. But I'm here to tell you that crazy ideas encouraged without precaution, crazy ideas encouraged without civility can really lead to deadly outcomes. So at the University of Michigan, you take all these different people with different beliefs, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and you put them all in one classroom and you say, discuss. Now, outside the walls of this university, oftentimes those kind of discussion leads to violence. Think back to the midterm elections. You have people getting their heads stomped in against the curb because they have a different idea, a different belief. Luckily, the conversations here on this campus are civil. And it's something that oftentimes we take for granted. Something like this event right here, this debate that's about to take place, is something that really doesn't happen all the time outside the walls of this university. Has anyone ever filled a car up with gasoline before? Yes, everyone. Has anyone ever lit a cigarette while they're filling a car up with gasoline before? All right, good. If you did, you're probably not here right now. So, because you know that if you fill your car up with gasoline as you're lighting a match, you're mixing 2 volatile chemicals together. At the University of Michigan, we're not mixing volatile chemicals, maybe in the chem department, but we are mixing volatile ideas. And these volatile ideas need a way to be talked about in a civil manner. So that's why Consider Magazine is a sponsor of this event. PETA is a sponsor of this event. Michigan Ethics Bowl team is a sponsor of this event. All of our goals are to encourage this civil discourse on campus, to make sure that these conversations we have, these intellectual viewpoints, these desperate viewpoints, are all talked about, are all encouraged in a very civil manner. In 1776, when our country was first founded, Thomas Paine wrote that in order for our democracy to survive, we need unfettered discussion. This unfettered exchange of ideas needs to take place. And at the University of Michigan, we're fortunate enough for it to happen. So I'd like to introduce Bruce. Bruce is the Vice President of Policy for People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, the world's largest animal rights organization. He has been the mastermind behind many of PETA's most attention-grabbing campaigns and has coordinated thousands of protests and actions around the globe. Bruce works to champion animal rights, including his famous streak outside Buckingham Palace, wearing only the words goveg.com. Painted on his chest and back has made headlines around the world, including numerous stories in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. He has contributed to books by Princeton bioethicist Peter Singer and novelist Jonathan Safran Foer. Sorry if I pronounced his name wrong. Foer. He's a frequent contributor to HuffingtonPost.com and co-authored a book about activism, the widely praised Animal Activist Handbook. He also produced the influential PETA film Meat Your Meat, which is narrated by Alec Baldwin and is viewed more than 1 million times last year alone. Thank you for being here with us today. And the Michigan Ethics Bowl team was founded in 2008 and is sponsored by the Center for Ethics in Public Life. The team is a group of undergraduate students who are trained in ethical theory and discuss contemporary ethical issues in order to travel to compete in an annual intercollegiate debate. Thank you both for being here with us today. The format for this discussion will be as follows. Bruce will talk, then the debate team will talk for 10 minutes. Bruce has a 5-minute rebuttal. The debate team will then have a 5-minute rebuttal. Then there will be 5 minutes of questions, more debate from the debate team, followed by a 5-minute conclusion from Bruce. And then if there's time remaining, we'll do a question and answer session. So thank you very much. And now let me introduce Bruce.
So why do Ohio State students put their diplomas in their car windows? So they can park in the handicap zones. So thank you for that. So this is sort of neither here nor there, but just before we start, because I thought it was interesting, but did you all hear that Bill Gates bought the Seattle Times this morning? Yeah, he buys it every morning. Thank you. I'm done. No. It is really, I'm delighted to be here. I love coming to college campuses. I love doing these sorts of debates. I adopted a vegan diet in college some years back, and it seems to me to be the time when people are most primed to be thinking about these issues and questioning our own lives and that sort of thing. And one of the things I love about this topic specifically is that it doesn't require that people change any of the views that they already have. So my contention is going to be that if you care about the environment or you care about animals, you will come by the end of the debate to agree with me that eating meat is unethical, that you will simply be in a position in which you're aligning the values you already hold with your actions or with your ethical understanding. So how many people in here recycle? Pretty much everybody recycles. How many people attempt to use less energy where you can? Almost everybody attempts to use less energy where they can. How many people in here believe that animals should be legally protected from abuse? Yeah, so we hold certain ethical values vis-a-vis the environment and vis-a-vis animals that are almost universal in society. This is a Gallup poll from 2000 and 2010. I think we actually are better than 90%, but 90% of Americans recycle, 85% are reducing use of energy, 76% are buying things that are more environmentally friendly, and 36% contributed to an environmental conservation or wildlife preservation group. Basically, we are a nation of environmentalists. But even more so than we're environmentalists, we're a nation of animal lovers. And I think just about everybody in this room raised your hand when I asked, should animals be legally protected from abuse? You know, you are in, well, I don't know if, good company. 97% of Americans agree with you. You know, 97% of Americans don't agree on anything, right? Except this. They believe that animals should be protected from abuse. The vegetarian movement, the anti-meat movement, is pretty simple, and it asks us with our food choices to take Socrates seriously when he says that the unexamined life is not worth living. So I grew up eating meat. I grew up in Oklahoma, and the food groups for high school students in Oklahoma are McDonald's and Dairy Queen, at least with my friends. We ate Big Macs, and we ate Dairy Queen Blizzards. That was pretty much it. And the first time somebody told me, and I got to college, and somebody said, I don't eat meat. And I thought he had a disease or something. You know, he can't digest it, or something's wrong with him. You know, he might as well have said, I don't breathe oxygen. You know, coming from Oklahoma, I don't eat meat. Not, you know, that's not a sentence I would have ever expected to have heard. It wasn't something I understood. At that point, I read a book called Diet for a Small Planet. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the argument from Diet for a Small Planet, because that is the reason that I originally adopted a vegan diet. It's for environmental reasons. So I weigh about 190 pounds. If I do nothing but lay in bed watching Jerry Springer reruns, I'm going to burn about 2,000 calories a day. Except when I get excited, when I'm, Jerry, Jerry, Jerry! You know, then it ticks up just a little bit when I'm getting enthused. That same sort of analysis, the physiological analysis, not the bad taste in television, that same basic physiological analysis applies for animals as well. The vast majority of the calories that we feed to a chicken or a pig or a cow or any other animal, the vast majority of those calories, the animal expends simply existing. So how many people in here think it would be ethical to go to your refrigerator, open up the door, take 19 plates of pasta, dump them in the trash, and eat 1 plate of pasta? Usually the debate team has a few people who are staged to, like, an entire section of people will, nicely dressed, you know, nice haircuts, will raise their hands. But not this time. No, it's not ethical. And yet that's the relationship we each enter into each time we choose to eat any animal products at all. And it's actually quite a bit worse than that. It's not just the resources in, resources out. It's all of the extra stages of production. So veganism is not about purity. Obviously, growing crops, tilling the crops, shipping the crops, turning them into some great American food like Budweiser beer or something, great vegan food. That all is resource intensive. But raising animals for food requires about 4 times as many stages of production, both gas-guzzling, pollution-spewing vehicles, as well as pollution-spewing, energy-intensive factories. You still have to grow the crops, but now you're shipping them to a feed mill. And you've got this feed mill that you have to operate. And then you're shipping the feed to a factory farm, and you've got the factory farm you've got to operate. And then you're shipping the animals to the, the animals to the slaughterhouse, and you've got the slaughterhouse you have to operate. Gas-guzzling, pollution-spewing vehicles at every stage. John Robbins crunched the numbers in a book called The Food Revolution, and he found that it requires about 20 times the energy to get a calorie from meat as a calorie from plants, 14 times the water, and 25 times the land. Environmentally speaking, on the environmental basis alone, we should agree that eating meat is not ethical. You don't funnel crops through animals like that if you have a perfectly acceptable alternative, vegetarian foods. This is probably the largest banner that's ever been unveiled. These are people right here. It's in the Amazon rainforest. It says KFC Amazon criminal because the rainforest is being chopped down to grow soy to feed to farmed animals. And Greenpeace thinks that should stop. I would suggest that we probably all think that should stop as well. But it's not just KFC, it's the entire meat industry. Greenpeace wanted a target. They wanted a corporation that would begin to change this. But the inefficiency is absolute and impossible to overcome. So that's number one. And so anybody who thinks that the environment is an ethical concern, and it looks to me like that's just about all of you, on that basis alone should find with me that eating meat is unethical. I think everybody, even more people, raise their hands about protecting animals from abuse, and yet farmed animals have absolutely no legal protection from abuse whatsoever. So if you are a cat or a dog, you have legal protection. If you are a pig or a chicken, you do not. And the reality is that cats, dogs, pigs, chickens, they all have the same basic capacity to feel pain. They're made of flesh and blood and bone, just like we are. They have the same five physiological senses that we do, and they feel pain in much the same way that we do. So who here would eat Gracie? Gracie's the cat in the upper left, in case. OK, there are a few people who would eat Gracie. Well, you can't. She's my cat. And she's perfect. But I think everybody in here would be hard-pressed to come up with a cogent argument for how it's any different to eat Gracie or a pig, a dog or a chicken. And in fact, on cognition tests, what we're finding is that chickens and pigs both outperform both dogs and cats, according to animal behaviorists. The cat lovers say the cats are refusing to participate in the studies. But the dogs are definitely trying. And the chickens and the pigs are outperforming the dogs and the cats. There's an animal behaviorist in Australia, Dr. Chris Evans, and he says when he talks about the capacities of chickens, capacities for foresight, capacity for metacognition, capacities for empathy, when he lists off the capacities at conferences, people inevitably think that he's talking about monkeys. So I think intuitively most of us recognize that when we're talking about even chickens and pigs, we're talking about someone, not something. Unless we have a really good reason for it, we should try to avoid eating these animals and causing them to suffer. I want to show a quick video. It's an excerpt from Meet Your Meat, which you can see the full video narrated by Alec Baldwin at meat.org. And I encourage you, especially if you eat meat, to have a look at it, because it's what you're supporting if you choose to eat animal products. So this is debeaking. It causes chronic pain that lasts for more than 30 days. It kills a proportion of the animals. This is where egg-laying hens come from, crammed an average of 7 hens in a tiny cage where they can't even turn around. Many of them die in the cages, obviously. Chickens are bred and drugged. They now grow 7 times as quickly as they would naturally. They can barely stand. They can't even walk. You walk into one of these places, each chicken has about that much space to live for their entire lives. I think you're about to see a carpet full of chickens. But Alice Walker calls eating chickens eating misery because they are so gratuitously abused and their legs cripple so completely. This is chicken gathering. So they cram 6,000 to 9,000 chickens on the back of a transport truck to cart them to the slaughterhouse. This is chicken slaughter. thousands of animals per hour, snapped fully conscious into those shackles. They're still conscious when their throats are slit, 100% of them in the U.S. Mutilation of pigs, which happens across the industry, not just on factory farms. Castration, again without pain relief. Felony cruelty if you did it to a dog or a cat. Routine practice if you do it to a pig or a cow. Pig slaughter, obviously. So you get the picture. I adopted a vegan diet, as I mentioned, for environmental reasons. But before I came to PETA, I was running a homeless shelter and a soup kitchen in inner city Washington, D.C. for 6 years. And while I was there, I came across a book called Christianity and the Rights of Animals by an Anglican theologian by the name of Andrew Lindsay. And Lindsay's argument is pretty basic. It's pretty intuitive. It applies. It's really about the nature of what it means to be a human being. And he argues that ethical human beings, when we have a choice between doing something that is merciful and something that supports misery in the world, every single time, ethical people choose mercy. If we can do something that's kind or something that's cruel, every single time, ethical people choose kindness. Percy Bysshe Shelley puts it in another way. In explaining his vegetarianism, he said, I want no part of anything I can't write a pleasant poem about. You know, I like that as a concept. I can't write a pleasant poem about anything. I'm not a poet. But applied to the nature of integrity, what is impacting to me is the idea that if I don't want to watch it, I don't even want to think about it. If I wouldn't do it, I shouldn't pay somebody else to do it for me. So if you found that video difficult to watch, if you wouldn't want to spend an afternoon slicing chickens' throats open, I think it's worth asking yourselves why you enter into this mercenary relationship wherein you pay people to abuse animals in that way on your behalf. The great philosopher Sir Paul McCartney put it extremely well when he said, it's staggering when you think about it. Vegetarianism takes care of so many things in one shot: ecology, famine, cruelty. If you believe that the environment is an ethical value, or anti-cruelty is an ethical value, I hope you will find with me that eating animals is unethical. Thank you. And Boris thanks you.
Thank you, Bruce. Even if we concede, which we do, that factory farming and the current features of the animal eating industry are unethical, PETA's arguments avoid the underlying principle of whether it is ethical to eat animals. Therefore, we begin with an exception to Bruce's argument. Eating animals does not necessarily entail cruelty to animals or degradation to the environment. We will present two positive arguments. Number one, that eating animals is justified because animals lack the moral value we assign to humans. And number two, that consumption becomes a moral imperative when it is necessary for human life and health.
All right, thanks again, Bruce. So, PETA has presented an argument that eating meat is unethical. Hello? Okay. PETA has presented an argument that eating meat is unethical, partially because we are promoting the suffering that they face in factory farms. All right? So I'm going to say that, yeah, excessive eating of meat does do that. It does promote factory farms. However, this does not prove that eating meat, especially if we cut down on general consumption, is unethical. All right, consider this. A bovine's life out in a factory farm is just pure misery. I mean, we saw a video. I don't want to expand on that. However, consider a bovine's life just in the wild. Yeah, it does consist of simple pleasures: roaming, grazing, occasional breeding, whatever. But it also includes a lot of tragedies. This includes famine, death of young, and tragic, horrible deaths by predators and by speeding cars. So I'm going to present you an alternative, and it's going to be a bovine raised in the manner of producing something called Kobe beef. Now, imagine this. The cow, instead of being brutally murdered by an animal, is kept at a large grazing grass field, not corn, grass, with area to roam and do its bovine things with its bovine friends. It's provided health care, which you don't see animals in the wild getting health care. And it is also given the occasional massage once in a while. So I'm not trying to say that this is the ideal bovine life, But what I'm trying to say that this is infinitely better than the factory farm life, and it is at least comparable, if not better, than the life in the wild. So I have this question. Is that abuse? Is that harm? Is that being unmerciful? I don't know. So why is it unethical to eat meat? You know, especially if the animal is not suffering. And I'm going to pass on the argument to my teammate here.
All right, thank you. So one of the biggest points that Bruce makes, it deals with the environment. The fact that factory farming is very insufficient and it damages the environment tremendously. And I'd like to thank Bruce because we completely agree with that. We're not trying to say that factory farming is ethical. However, if you look at the title even of today's event, it is eating meat ethical. Thus, we cannot make synonymous the very act of eating meat with factory farming. And if we keep this in mind, we realize that eating meat and having a great environment are not two mutually exclusive things. So in terms of the environment, I'd like to look at 3 points. First, the use of grain, as Bruce pointed out, to feed these animals. I'd like to present one alternative to factory farming that avoids this, and this is a system called using default livestock. In a default livestock system, these the livestock are fed grass and they're able to roam over large fields. Now what this does is, the reason that factory farming is insufficient in the first place is that we have to expend so much energy growing these crops that by the time we sit at our dinner table, for those of us that do eat meat, we're getting only a fraction back of the energy that we put in to obtain that meat. However, in what the default livestock system does, we all see grass outside. It's very easy to maintain and sustain largely by rainwater. Therefore, we don't put in nearly the amount of energy that we do with a factory farm. Furthermore, a big issue, again, as Bruce pointed out, is the use of water. Some studies have it that in the United States, it's something like 90% of fresh water is used in the livestock sector. However, if we take a closer look at these numbers, 1.3% is actually ingested by these animals. Now, you may ask yourself, what happens to the rest? It is, again, a majority of it is used to grow the crops that are eventually fed to these animals. However, if you consider that in a default livestock system, these animals are eating grass and not crops, you realize that grass takes much less water. You don't need the extensive irrigation that you have with factory farming. Therefore, you're able to reduce tremendously the amount of fresh water, essentially, that you're wasting with factory farming systems and still have the luxury of eating meat. Thirdly, I'd like to refer again to Bruce's point about pollution. There's a United Nations report called the Livestock Long Shadow, which states that the livestock sector contributes more to pollution of the environment than transportation. There are 2 things I'd like to point out here. First of all, the numbers, as Professor at UC Davis has pointed out, his name is Miltner, suggest that these numbers are not entirely accurate. We saw the deforestation of the Amazon, but this report included all deforestation of the Amazon, and this is not, factory farming is not solely responsible for this. But even if we do take this number at face value, we must consider that if we do, again, this is one alternative, switch to this default livestock system, we are going to be raising less animals. We agree with Bruce that the amount of animals we are raising today is excessive, and it cannot be sustainable. However, reducing meat intake still allows us to eat meat, and we're completely fine with that. And what this does is this reduction, it reduces pollution in terms of transportation, in terms of the pollution that comes from the animals themselves, so that we create a much more sustainable system. And finally, some people may say, well, isn't it just better to grow crops and you know, just do away with the animal thing? Well, I'd like to point you out, if you go and you want to invest in stock, one of the first things that you are told is that you have to diversify. And we must do the same thing with our source of food. And I'd like to point, the fires in Moscow this past year wiped out a lot of wheat grain production, and food prices have skyrocketed. Well, you know, crops have, again, failed in the past. They will in the future, and we must essentially have an insurance policy against this, and animal products are one such insurance policy. And finally, I'd like to point out the fact that, according to Dr. Allen, who came up with this virtual water, essentially what it does is it compares the efficiency of growing certain things. I'd like to point out that the coffee is less efficient to grow than, for example, chicken. However, how many of us, you know, go to Starbucks or whatever, obtain, like, let's say, fair trade coffee? We do not think that is unethical. Therefore, what this really highlights is that any perceived problem that comes with eating meat is not because it is environmentally, you know, inefficient, because that can be alleviated. No, the real issue is it comes down to the killing of the animal, which I'd like to pass over to Kevin to discuss.
Thank you. And in turning back towards animal cruelty, we've already shown that there's ways in which we can raise these animals such that we're fully respecting their unique animal dignity, allowing them to satisfy their physiological needs and instinctual desires, and in general ensure that they're living a fulfilling and happy life, an equally as good of a life or a much better life than they would in the wild. Therefore, in raising animals, as Hassan had said, the only remaining respect in which the practice could be cruel and unethical is the actual killing of the animal. Now, some would hold that no matter how well we raise these animals while they're alive, intentionally ending their lives makes the practice unethical. And to this claim, we disagree. We hold that it is not necessarily unethical to end the life of an animal, and to explain why, let's examine why we believe human life is so valuable and why we believe that it is wrong to end the life of a human. Now, Ronald Dworkin puts forth the view that human life is sacred and intrinsically valuable, and that this value is reflected by how much we are willing to invest in ensuring that an individual's life does not end. An individual human makes an enormous personal investment into his own life. He establishes long-term goals and aspirations and has strong desires about the style of life he wishes to live. Moreover, both the family of this individual and society itself invest strongly into ensuring that an individual's life does not end, and this is because we realize that the human being's realization of his own long-term goals and aspirations are immeasurably valuable. In short, a human being has an exceedingly valuable future in that he can realize these lifelong aspirations and accomplish long-term goals about the type of life he wants to live. And to see that this is true, look at when we hold the death of a human being to be the most tragic, i.e. the age of adolescence. And in the case of adolescence, this is where the individual has placed his personal investments. He is starting to realize himself in the type of life he wants to live. And at this point in life, if the individual dies, it's horribly tragic because he has not been able to go out into the world and try to accomplish these lifelong goals. And conversely, the death of an elderly person is not tragic in the same way. An elderly person has had their whole life to live and has realized the long-term goals and aspirations they had while they were younger. And so let's turn back to the case of animals. Most animals, especially cows and chickens, do not form the same type of long-term goals and aspirations that a human being does. Their desires are instinctual and reside only in the present moment or a single day. The death of an animal is not tragic because its death does not preclude it from satisfying a lifelong goal or aspiration it wished to achieve. An animal's future life is not valuable in the same way that a human's life is valuable. An animal's death only restricts the animal from achieving the same instinctual desires it has achieved numerous times before, whereas a human's death precludes that human from achieving immeasurably valuable lifelong desires. And so, if while the animal is alive, it is living an excellent life, allowed to satisfy its instinctual desires and physiological needs on a daily basis, and respected as a living being, then ending the life of this animal after a sufficient amount of its life has been lived, it is not unethical. We are not harming or wronging the animal, and thus are not treating it cruelly or unethically. And to that, I'd like to pass to my friend, Naomi.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'd like to continue on Kevin's ideas, that his rationalist argument for why we value human life over animal life, and to also appeal to this intrinsic idea that we all have that human life exists at a morally superior level than animal life, and to talk about when in cases it is requisite to maintaining the human value of life by the consumption of animals. I'd like to begin by Bruce took the words right out of me, that he said that unless we have a really good reason for it, we should not be consuming animals. So I have a couple of really good reasons. And the main reason itself is to maintain a certain level of health and human life. And there are many health benefits to eating meat, certainly that are provided if you can't eat meat. If you decide not to eat meat, they're provided through supplements or through ulterior food sources, such as protein. You can eat veggie burgers, but not the whole world's population has access to such supplements. Some other health benefits that come straight from eating meat are vitamin B13, omega-3 fatty acids, iron, and of course I said protein. Now in the case of iron in particular, people who are anemic have a very hard time maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and eating meat, science has concluded, is definitely the most direct source of iron and the best source of iron absorption for people with anemia. In order for people with anemia to maintain a certain level of human life, which we do value above animal consumption, it thus becomes ethical and morally actually imperative that humans are able to eat meat. Thank you. Oh, and to conclude, we have one last concluding statement. If you support sustainable farming, saving animals from suffering, and valuing human life over animal life, then you should support our side of the discussion. Thank you.
So I'm not, in 5 minutes, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, and unless I talk really, really fast. But if anybody has questions, please stay after if there's a burning question, desire that you want to see answered. The thing that I want to stress, though, is that we all agree that factory farms are unethical, both environmentally and from a cruelty to animals standpoint. And then I want to point out that 100% of the food in your dining hall and about 100% of the food on any menu, unless that it says that it's not factory farmed, it is factory farmed. So we agree that just about all of the meat that you might find yourself eating is unethical, which strikes me as a pretty important point. I also just want to show you the best of the best. This is about 1/10 of 1% of all farms in this country. You can see the full video if you Google free range, a documentary. So this is gathering. And this is slaughter. This is the best of the best. It's well under 1/10 of 1% of chickens who are treated this well. More than 99% of it is the video of chicken slaughter that I showed you earlier. And for cattle and pigs, 100% are slaughtered in massive factory farms. Some of them lead better lives up until they're transported many hours to slaughter, but 100% of them are slaughtered in massive slaughterhouses. So chickens are tossed into boiling hot water for feather removal, and as you'll see, they're still conscious because it takes about 60 seconds after their arteries are slit for them to die. And that girl right there is still conscious. So that's what you're supporting, even with so-called free-range meats. The environmental argument, so I'm going to move on to the argument that they're having and just say, we agree factory farming is cruel and environmentally unsustainable and is therefore unethical, which means all of the meat in your dining hall, all of the meat at every fast food restaurant, all of the meat that probably anybody in this room eats on a regular basis is supporting vast environmental waste and is also supporting cruelty to animals that would shock you if you had to watch it happening and that you would never want to participate in. Default livestock is 0% of the animals who you might find in the United States. Even free range is under 1%. Default livestock is 0. Even that farm is feeding those animals food that could have been grown for human beings. And even with default livestock, about 35%, more than everything else combined, of global warming is animal respiration. I mean, just human respiration is 8% of all global warming gases in the world. Animal respiration is the big thing. By existing, the animals contribute to global warming. So even default livestock is way more global warming than if you're eating plants directly. According to Livestock's Long Shadow, as they pointed out, 40% more greenhouse gases than all 18-wheelers, jumbo jets, and other vehicles combined. So I want to really, though, focus on the fact that my hunch is, I think 3 people said they'd be willing to slit Gracie's throat and eat her in this room. And I think you would be hard-pressed to come up with a cogent argument for what the difference is between eating a dog or a cat, a chicken or a pig. The Ethics Bull spent an awful lot of time talking about the differences between humans and other animals, which denies a lot of the science. In fact, chickens and pigs and cattle do have metacognition. They do reflect on their own lives. They do know what's happening. They do remember other animals for years. Like, they lead emotional lives that, as Darwin said, are more similar to us than they are different from us. But regardless of that, we all in here recognize what I was talking about earlier, that if you can choose between mercy and misery, you should choose mercy. If you can choose between cruelty and kindness, you should choose kindness. Every single time you sit down to eat, there are gradations of abuse. And free range is better, but every time you sit down to eat, that's the decision that you're making. So from an ethical standpoint, if you wouldn't waste food, pollute, and kill animals, I hope you will find with me that eating meat is unethical. Thank you.
All right. Excuse me. Okay, so I'd just like to point out, again, Bruce responded to the default livestock system, and one of the things he said is that, in the United States at least, that 0% of, our farming or raising of livestock is from this default livestock system. However, that does not mean it's not possible. Just because we do not employ this system now, that does not mean that we cannot, or it is not being employed in other areas. Thus, we can say factory farming, again, is unethical, but we cannot say all meat eating is unethical, because that implies that all meat eating comes from unethical sources, and we outlined the fact that default livestock systems are not unethical. And then also, in terms of the animal respiration, how that contributes to pollution, I'd like to just point out that we said that we believe strongly in the reduction of the amount of animals that we are raising, because, again, it is not sustainable. Therefore, and I never, gave out a number of, how many animals we should raise, so I don't know how we're coming to these conclusions about the amount of pollution from respiration that's going to be caused by this default livestock system when we haven't set a target number of animals. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Elton.
All right. So let's focus on pragmatics a little bit, and then I'll talk to you guys about what it really means to have value in animals. So 43% of respiration, 43% of global warming, or whatever the statistic was, is caused by animal respiration. All right, so what would be the most logical answer for that?
Stop raising so many animals for food.
Okay. And kill them all?
Yeah, because you're going to eat them and then stop breeding them.
Okay. So I agree, 90%. Yeah, we stop 90%, and the 10% that's still there, we can still keep as consumption. What's wrong with that? And I would like to point out the arguments from before. If we can knock down the environmental, which is all theoretical, so that exactly, I don't think, can be used as a definitive answer for either side. It comes down to whether eating animals in itself is ethical. So one of the key proponents that the key points that Bruce used to attack this was, what's the difference between a dog and a cat and a chicken and everything, and would you really be, willing to slaughter one of them to eat the meat? Well, I'm going to say something from personal experiences I have. I grew up in China. Back when resources were low, meat consumption was very low. So we had meat maybe once a week, and I didn't think that was very unsustainable. But we had to kill our own meat because we raised the chickens from birth. And, they were pretty happy chickens. We didn't name them or anything, because I think naming animals is kind of a cultural thing. But I did end up actually gutting and killing a chicken. It took maybe 30 seconds, out of the chicken's year-long or so life. Wasn't quite sure. But I didn't find that particularly gruesome. Last point. If I had that chicken as a pet, if I named that chicken Billy, if that chicken, went into his little Billy chicken bowl and ate whatever Billy ate, I would never, ever kill that friend of mine, Billy. And I would never allow any of you to kill that friend of mine, Billy. And I would never let anybody treat Billy cruelly, because Billy would be then my pet. But does that grant animals rights? I don't know. I'll pass it on.
So I would like to address this question of mercy versus misery. Obviously, we want to make the merciful choice, but when we really consider what is the merciful choice, I think it's clear that we should be taking the responsibility to raise these animals and make sure they are living a life much better than they would in the wild. It is it would be a misery to let these animals loose out into the wild and face terrible predation. We've raised these animals in a way such that they can't exist in the wild and they can't compete with other animals. The chickens would get slaughtered by wolves. The cows would be slaughtered by other animals. They cannot exist anymore in such a state. So what is the merciful decision? We should take these animals, make sure they're living a excellent, fulfilling life, respect their animal dignity. And the fact is, all animals, including humans, are going to die. That is a fact of life that we cannot avoid. So what should we do about animal death? Should we let them loose and let them possibly face a gruesome death by other animals? Now, obviously, what Bruce is showing is a very gruesome death as well. But there are many examples in which we can end the life of an animal in ways that are much more ethical and much more merciful than they would in the wild or in factory farming.
So I'd also like to pick back up on the argument that Bruce didn't have really a response to, which is the cases where people don't have access to proper nutrition, to proper, if they have a disease, to elements of eating meat that will alleviate this disease or they need in order to sustain a certain standard of human health. Bruce talked about working in the homeless shelter. I myself have also worked in a soup kitchen, and what we served, I myself am a vegetarian, and what we served to the people who came to the soup kitchen was meat. And if they're coming to the soup kitchen already, and this speaks for America, this speaks throughout the world, if they're coming to a soup kitchen already because they need food, because they don't have the other options or more resources to get food or to lead a vegetarian lifestyle, then it does become an ethical imperative that they eat the meat that is provided by a soup kitchen. This idea wasn't really picked up on. Okay. And that concludes our rebuttal. Our first question is, do you support a vegetarian diet, and is it ethical to be a vegetarian?
I do support a vegetarian diet, and for the reasons that I enumerated in my opening and rebuttal, I do think it's ethical to be a vegetarian.
Okay, so a vegetarian including the consumption of milk and eggs.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you meant vegetarian as distinct from vegan.
Yeah, well, you used both words in the presentation, so we were trying to get at which one is your stance.
Well, I think that a vegetarian diet is more ethical than a diet that includes meat, and that a vegan diet is more ethical than a diet that includes dairy and eggs. So I think in the same way that a diet that eliminates all factory farmed products is more ethical than a diet that includes factory farmed products, there are gradations of abuse and suffering. But the egg industry and the dairy industry are extremely abusive and also environmentally unsustainable. The same arguments about global warming, resource use, and calories in, calories out, where it's 20 calories in to get a calorie out in the form of meat, it's 6 to 8 calories in to get a calorie out in the form of dairy or eggs. So I think most of us, we wouldn't throw away the 19 plates of pasta. We also shouldn't throw away the 5 to 7 plates of pasta that are entailed in eating dairy and eggs. And the abuse level for the egg industry is actually the worst of the worst, although sum total it's fewer animals than chicken flesh. So Elton, you said that the environmental harm of the meat industry is theoretical. And I don't know if you misspoke or if I misheard.
I did misspeak.
Oh, okay.
What I meant to say was that giving up meat would have theoretical environmental impact. And I say this because one of the things that the meat industry depends on is the corn industry. And actually, I'm going to pass it on to my...
I have another question. I was mostly, if you had said it was theoretical, I was
okay, well, yeah, it was...
wonder what you meant by that. But you also, I think, was that you? I'm sorry, my notes are a little bit confused, but I actually think it was Kevin who said that there are examples of better ways to end animals' lives. And I'm wondering what those examples are and where one might find meat from those examples.
Well, the particular example I had in mind was Polyface Farms, which is an example of a farmer who grows or raises animals locally and treats these animals with love and respect while they're alive. He cares for them and treats them as pets while they're alive. And yes, obviously, when you're going to kill an animal, you have to inflict some harm on the animal. But if it's done out of a way of love and respect for the animal, that's I'm not. I mean, what? That's not a that's not a unreasonable position to hold. If we were all raising meat locally in our own homes with our own families, loving these animals for being alive, treating them with respect, allowing them to satisfy their needs and stuff like that, at the end of the day, killing it out of with those things in mind, I don't think it is unethical.
Would it change your view to know that Joel Salatin sends all of his cows and pigs to the same factory slaughterhouses that Tyson and Smithfield do, and that his chickens are slaughtered exactly like we saw in the video?
I would
You
dispute
can find his
that.
chicken slaughter on YouTube pretty easily. It looks actually a little worse than that.
I read an article from Yes Magazine, which states that he is personally killing his animals. And
Just birds. He wants to kill the mammals. He can't legally do it yet.
Right, because we're not local enough yet. If we were all being more local and doing this upon ourselves, taking this responsibility on ourselves, then we wouldn't have to ship them to a large slaughterhouse.
Okay.
So our next question is, have you ever taken medicine in the past, or do you plan to in the future?
I have taken medicine.
Okay. That's all. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Thanks.
And Barack Obama works in a White House that was built by slaves, just by the way.
Yeah, it's true. Has this medicine...
And everybody in the South drives on roads that were laid down by slaves.
Okay. Well,
But I think they're opposed to slavery.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Of course, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So was this medicine FDA approved?
It was.
Is part of the FDA approval going through animal testing?
It is.
Okay. Great.
And I oppose that, just like I'm guessing Barack Obama opposes slavery, but still works in the White House.
And why do you oppose it? In the
Because,
case of animal testing?
I oppose it for a variety of reasons. I oppose it because I think it's unethical. I think, as Richard Dawkins says, that other species are our evolutionary cousins, and as Darwin says, that they are more like us than they are unlike us, and for the same reason we shouldn't use other human beings as a means to an end. We should not be using animals as a means to an end. I also oppose it for the same reason that the British Medical Journal refuses to publish animal research. Animal research extrapolating from animals to human beings oftentimes gives false positives, false negatives. We've been doing it for a long time, but the evidence in its favor for protecting human health is pretty bad.
The evidence in favor of animal testing?
Yeah.
Such as the animal testing that's led to cures to different diseases, to alleviations and treatments?
There's an awful lot of money in animal testing, and consequently there are people who argue for it because they're making millions of dollars arguing on its behalf. But if you look at Scientific American, a couple years back, they did a cover story, Is Animal Testing Necessary? And they have scientists who say it is necessary, scientists who say it's not necessary, and in fact has been counterproductive. There's also a doctors and research group called Americans for Medical Advancement. I think you can find their website at curedisease.com. And they argue from a purely scientific standpoint that, in fact, it's the same reason that when you're doing research and a drug may work in men or not in women. It may work in, menopausal women, but not other women. We try to extrapolate from rats to mice. It doesn't work. Protease inhibitors don't work in any animals, and they took forever to get them to help human beings with AIDS. The polio vaccine was shelved for more than a decade, that it could have been helping human beings, and Sabin said it was animal research that caused it to be shelved for more than a decade. And that's all aside from the ethical argument that these beings are more like us than they're unlike us, and we shouldn't be exploiting them.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. So, the issue of default livestock and CO2, I feel like at two different places, two different people talked about both the fact that these animals are already alive, so we need to slaughter them so that they will stop producing CO2, And then at another point, the same basic argument was made that a so-called humane farm would be better than the death that animals might experience in the wild. But since the comparison is we bring them into existence in order to kill them, both the CO2 argument, we brought them into existence to kill them. If we stopped bringing them into the existence, as she said when you asked her, they wouldn't produce the CO2. And similarly, why would we compare even so-called humane farms to the wild rather than comparing so-called humane farms to our not operating, raising and slaughtering animals in the first place? Is that clear?
Okay, so I want to clarify something for maybe the third time, which is I don't want to raise 1 trillion, 10 trillion, 100 trillion animals. I don't know what the numbers are. I mean, they're massive. I don't want to bring that into my argument. I don't want to say that we can sustainably eat as much meat as we do now. I want to say,
just to be clear, my question had nothing to do with numbers. It could be 3.
So I'm willing, personally, to bring an animal into existence, and to kill it 1 year later for sustenance in a sustainable manner in which that animal enjoys a decent, if not better than wild type life.
Yeah, and I guess my question was, what does wild have to do with it, and how?
I guess the animal might be feeling more utility than it would, possibly, if not equal utility than it would be just out of nothing. I mean, it's the same argument for why bring a dog into existence to raise as part of your family, or maybe why have like a nicer laptop versus a not as nice laptop.
If the point were to slit your dog's throat open, I would agree with you.
Well, we'll have to put a dog down eventually, and I mean, sadly, I've also experienced that. So, I mean, it's not the greatest feeling, but sometimes it's necessary.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you one question. Because when you're supporting a vegan diet, you are obviously still, I guess, ending the life of plants. And now, just don't laugh. Come on. Let's be rational here. Plants are living beings, too. And it's been shown through many studies that they react to being harmed. Defense mechanisms are released. And also that I'm sure any plant grower will tell you that if you're, like play music in front of the plant, it grows better. And so, right. I mean, that is an arbitrary distinction as well. All I'm trying to make the point is that the fact is we are living beings, and in order to survive, we have to kill other living beings. And I think that drawing a distinction based on things like cognition is arbitrary. So why not support a practice such that we can raise animals too, which leads to more diversity, and because it's been shown that like diversity with animals actually can they provide fertilizer. And with Joel Salatin's farm, he's raised the amount of organic matter at that farm from 1% to 8% with animals. So it's actually like helping the environment. So why not support a practice that helps the environment also?
Sort of 2 questions, but how many people here think that your lawn should be legally protected from abuse? Okay. 4 of you, including my father-in-law apparently, think that your lawn should be legally protected from abuse, wherein the rest of you agree that animals should be legally protected from abuse. What we know to be true is that biologically and physiologically, plants, although they're alive, don't have a capacity to feel pain. They don't have a capacity to suffer. They don't have a central nervous system. They don't have pain receptors. They don't have brains. You need all of those in order to experience pain. So yes, they respond to stimuli. They are alive, but they don't have a capacity to feel pain. Although, if your concern is plant suffering and plant death, you're killing 20 times as many of them to get 1 calorie from meat as to get that calorie from the plants directly. So, again, as I think I said in my opening, veganism is not, that's just true, right? I mean, some people I think legitimately are concerned about how much death they cause, including plant death. Well, veganism isn't about purity. It's about doing the best we can. It's about minimizing our support for suffering. So even, this is the environmental argument, rather than funneling crops through animals, eating the crops directly. And I'm sorry, you had a point 2 there, and I don't remember what it was.
Well, actually, I was going. By supporting a vegan diet, you're also, when you're harvesting the grain, you are killing thousands of field mice, which are also roaming through the grains. So again, by supporting your vegan diet, you are also killing animals. And I can't remember what my second point was, but that's and by harvesting grain, you're also by taking all this land and using it solely for our own purposes of raising grain, you're forcing animals outside of this, and that would also lead to more death as well by not allowing them to live among us, like forcing them out of our areas. You're also leading to more animal death, and by killing mice as well. So no matter what, we can't avoid killing animals.
Yeah, no, and I think I said in my opening that no matter what, we can't avoid killing animals. But again, you're killing far fewer of them if you're not cycling those crops through animals. If you're eating those crops directly, it's also surprisingly few animals who end up getting tilled up. Like, they are quick, wily little guys, and they largely get out of the way. But it's certainly some. And one of the examples that I give is when I'm talking to audiences of vegetarians and vegans about why we shouldn't be all vegan policey, is that veganism isn't about the moral purity of the tofu eater. It's about doing the best we can to lessen as much suffering as we can. And certainly when we're eating animals, we are causing both those animals to suffer directly. We're also causing exponentially more animals to suffer from all of the grains and the soy and the wheat and the other things that are tilled up. And there are certainly some animals who die in that process. But again, if we have a choice between more suffering and less suffering, especially when it's exponentially more suffering, I would say we go with less suffering. Okay.
So to begin, our platform, as stated before, is that we accept that factory farming is unethical in its current status, and we accept and certainly concede to the other side that it needs to change. What we have brought up, though, are inherent philosophical arguments negating the idea that the very practice of eating and consuming meat is not necessarily unethical, and that there can be actually very good ethical reasons for it, namely the preservation of human life. So what we're talking about is, for the structure of this debate, we could talk about whether or not the cosmetic industry, the fashion industry, is unethical. Both have degrading effects on the environment. Both entail some level of animal testing and cruelty to animals. Yet when we get up here and we talk about whether or not these industries are unethical, what we really need to talk about is the very practice of putting on makeup, the very practice of going to a fashion show if we're talking about these industries. Similarly so, in the argument over whether it is ethical to eat animals, what our side has presented are very strong and very valid and reasoned exceptions to factory farming in two cases where it is very apparent that's both happening now and in hypothetical situations where we could preserve the environment. In fact, create a more ecosystem-friendly system that doesn't weed out entirely meat consumption and instead reinforces what a lot of science has said will be much better for the planet, both environmentally and economically, but also in terms of cruelty to animals, ways in which animals can be raised and grown in a manner that is entirely unlike anything you've seen up here that Bruce has shown you, that Bruce has argued that happens in 99% of the times. In fact, when he said only 1% of the animals are actually grown in the way that we're describing, that's 1%. That's 1%, and if we see that there's 1% at least, we can see that eating animals in that case is in fact ethical. But also importantly, Bruce hasn't at all picked up on this notion that the human life has a higher moral platform than animal life. And in the case where you have to choose between preserving an animal life, such as cases where you forego certain dietary supplements and benefits of eating the animal in order to either fight disease or ward off disease. A lot of diseases come from lack of meat consumption, such as through lack of omega-3 fatty acids. then the ethical decision is to eat meat. There are large pockets of this world that depend on a meat diet, and the current status is that where they don't have access either economically or through other means, the science just isn't there, in order to take supplements, in order to have alternative sources of protein. And then it is an ethical imperative that they do consume meat. Okay. And to conclude, we talked about briefly in the Q&A about this idea of medical testing of animals for drugs, and this supports this claim that I just mentioned, is that FDA requires a level of testing animals before humans can receive treatments, receive cures to very deadly and terminal diseases. A lot of research in stem cell research has that is crucial for curing Parkinson's, for example, has gone through animal testing phases and made enormous improvements in helping the health of human lives. And Bruce even said that there's science that supports this and science that doesn't support it. Well, how do we define science then if it's there for both sides? But definitely from what I've read and from what our team has discussed, the science is there. It's very valid that animal testing is important, and the elements of animal testing that entail cruelty to animals are very much there in the same way that they currently are in the factory meat industry. Yet Bruce himself has taken medicine. So we all understand that there's a certain level of human value that we place, and our position is that we forego factory farming in order to have an environmentally friendly, a lack of cruelty to animals system so that we can eat meat and sustain human health and welfare. Thank you.
So when you came here today and you knew we were going to be debating the topic, is eating meat ethical? How many people here thought that we were going to be debating whether you should be eating meat? No, some people didn't think that was going to be what the topic was? Okay, but it's most of you who thought that was going to be the topic. That's what I thought the topic was going to be too. So I would contend that utopian hypotheticals about what we might or might not do, I'm going to rebut them, but I would contend that they are somewhat irrelevant in a discussion of ethics. A discussion of ethics is right and wrong action, not right and wrong action in some future hypothetical, but right and wrong action right now. And it seems to me that both the environmental argument and the cruelty argument vis-a-vis factory farming, which is way more than 99% of it, has been entirely ceded. So where right and wrong action is concerned, clearly eating meat is unethical. A couple of arguments that the pro-meat side at the Ethics Bowl that I'd like to respond to. They say that we could preserve the environment and that there is science indicating that there are ways to farm animals that are scientifically, ecologically sustainable. They didn't provide any evidence of that, and I would just like to point out that they do not have science on their side. So the Live Earth Global Warming Survival Handbook, on the basis of all of the evidence that exists, says going vegetarian is the single most effective thing you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. The guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore for his work on climate change says a major shift toward a plant-based diet is imperative if we're to have even a chance of preventing catastrophe. Environmentally speaking, some animal farming is better and worse than others, although the most humane farming tends to be the least environmentally sustainable. You know, one thing that factory farmers have going for them is relative efficiency. Once you let the animals outside, once you have to keep them alive for longer, they actually create more greenhouse gases, and if they're eating, they eat more food. Environmentally, there is no, yes, less is better than more. They talked a couple times about how they support decreasing the number of animals who we raise and eat. Well, decreasing is better than not decreasing, but at the end of the day, you are eating a product when you eat meat that is environmentally exponentially worse than an alternative product, beans, grains, fruits, vegetables. From an animal protection standpoint, if you're eating this hypothetical animal who is able to be the animal throughout his or her entire life before being shipped to a slaughterhouse, or on the Joel's farm if they're birds being slaughtered on farm, still conscious, throat slit open, bleeding to death for 60 seconds, felony cruelty if you did that to a dog or a cat even once, let alone thousands of times. Is that better? Yeah, it's absolutely better. But when you're sitting down to eat and making the decision about what you want to choose ethically, ethically speaking, you don't just choose compassion more, you choose it every time. You don't just choose mercy more, you choose it every time. They said 1% of meat is ethical. Well, no, it's free range is way less than 1%. The cattle and pigs are still slaughtered on the same factory farms. The chickens are slaughtered like you saw in the video. And even Joel at Polyface Farm, the exemplar, even Joel is farming the exact same strains of factory farmed animals. One strain of chicken, one strain of turkey, one strain of pig, one strain of cow. He buys the chickens from suppliers that sear their beaks off with a hot blade like we saw. He buys the pigs from suppliers that castrate them without pain relief and rip their ears open, as we saw. And he's the best of the best, way less than 1%. And yet felony cruelty where dogs or cats similarly abused. The argument of health was a bit perplexing to me, just because the American Dietetic Association and even the United States Department of Agriculture point out that vegetarians have a fraction of the obesity rate. Vegetarians have about a fourth the obesity rate. Vegans have a tenth the obesity rate of meat eaters. And vegetarians also have lower rates of heart disease, #1 killer in this country, diabetes at epidemic levels, high blood pressure at epidemic levels, cancer, #2 killer, obesity swiftly has just overtaken smoking as the #1 killer, and vegetarians and vegans have a fraction of the rate. So from a health standpoint, if your trade-off is I want to die, faster and be even more unhealthy, then you're eating meat. But trading that off against the cruelty and the environmental standpoint arguments, I'm not sure makes a lot of sense. The animal testing, I didn't say that there was, there's competing science on everything, but I would challenge people to look at the science on animal testing with an open mind. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it is going to fight and propagandize and PR like a multi-billion-dollar industry. But look into it, and I think you'll come to agree with me that it's actually harming human health rather than helping. Although that's an aside to the entire issue of is eating meat ethical. If you care about the environment or animals, I hope you'll side with me. Eating meat is unethical. Thank you.
All right, so I want to ask you guys to join me in thanking PETA and Michigan Ethics Bowl team one more time. Thank you very much. And by the looks on some of your faces and by the whispers I saw in the crowd throughout the debate, I'm guessing there are some questions that you guys have. So I'll bring the microphone around if you guys want to raise your hand, and then I'll kind of do this as fair as possible. So I'm going to start over here. I saw this hand first.
I'm just wondering about fish.
Is there more specific or just fish?
Is there, how do they treat fish? Is this an issue? Do they have a different central nervous system?
Okay.
There's also a video.
Is it ethical to eat fish?
There's also a video on meat.org. It's called Glass Walls. It's narrated by Paul McCartney, and we were finally able to get fish footage that we could use. We didn't have, when we put Meet Your Meat together, we didn't have the footage, but there is a section on fish in Glass Walls, and it's pretty shocking. I mean, biologically and physiologically, if you look into fish sentience, they have the same, they breathe like we do. They see, hear, taste, smell, touch like we do. They have the same pain response that we do. Just like fin fish, birds, and mammals are basically similar in those regards. And commercial fishing and fish farming are both hideously cruel. Commercial fishing involves tons of animals dragged from the ocean bottoms, crushed in their nets, dragged up. Oftentimes their swim bladders will rupture, their eyes will pop through their heads as they decompress, as they're coming up. And then they're all still conscious when they're sliced in half and tossed into freezers on these massive fishing trawlers. And then fish farming is arguably even worse. It looks like tubs of writhing spam. It's in the you have to see it to believe it category. And again, they're all still conscious, on these fish farms as they're sliced in half. So the foremost living marine biologist, Sylvia Earle, who's an explorer in residence at National Geographic, she says fish are interesting. They have personalities. They hurt when they're wounded. But she says they're so good-natured, so curious. They're sensitive. They have personalities. I never eat anyone I know personally. I wouldn't deliberately eat a grouper. any more than I'd eat a Cocker Spaniel. So the same basic arguments, especially the cruelty argument, would apply to fish.
So just to sum up, you would think it's unethical to eat fish, right?
Yes.
Okay. By your descriptions, I would assume so. Yeah. So, would anyone from the Mission Ethics Bowl team like to respond to that? No, okay. Next question was go right here.
This question is meant for the debate team. During Bruce's closing remarks, I noticed some of you shake your head in disagreement when Bruce said that debating ethics is not meant to be philosophical, but rather applicable to living now. So how would you suggest as college students living on a college campus to be an ethical meat eater?
Okay, so I wasn't nodding my head, or shaking my head, I should say, in terms of the philosophical part of it. I don't think it's entirely philosophical. Sure, I mean, I agree completely with Bruce. 99% of the meat, livestock, whatever in the United States is factory farming. But I personally, I don't eat from that 99%. And I believe that it is obviously, what? Where do I eat from? I eat what's called halal meat, and it is not sent to a factory farm. It's a local butcher shop. And like, of course, you have to kill the animal. I think that's the biggest contention, that I think between us. But I don't think that killing of that animal is unethical. But it's not. It doesn't go through a factory farm. So to dismiss and again, it's 99%, but it's not. It's not everything. So I don't think it's entirely philosophical at all.
I guess I mean today and the thousands of students on campus right now, if we were all to be ethical meat eaters, how would we do it?
Okay, can I respond? Just one more thing. Okay, so we're not saying that, again, it's not gonna look like what it is today. You just eat less meat. That doesn't mean you don't eat any meat at all, and I think that's one of the points that is kind of being missed here. There's a difference between not eating meat and eating less meat. And that's something that I myself, I eat less meat, and I think to point back to the health issues, I'd like to essentially point out the fact that these numbers are taken from let's say average Americans, and average Americans, we concede, eat too much meat. We're not, but so to put these numbers up, sure, yeah, if you eat like 6 cheeseburgers a week, like you're gonna be unhealthy and you're probably gonna be obese. But if you eat like let's say like a steak once a week, and as we said, especially if you have some sort of ailment, and not everyone. Again, we have the luxury of living in the United States where you just go buy a supplement, at your local pharmacy or whatever. If you go to different places, they don't have that luxury.
Also, the point that we were shaking our heads about is the fact that we were talking about that ethics is just about what you do in the here and now, whereas us and what we do and like our training is based in like theory. So to summarize ethics as just something that is applicable only to the moment is like, that's just not our branch of ethics. We talk about like our debate right now is about the act of eating meat. Could it ever be ethical? We're like, I mean, we've said it a million times that we don't agree with factory farming. We don't agree with anything shown there. Like, we're not like, yeah, that's a good thing. Our point more so is that it's not just about what's happening now. Like, we're clearly against what's happening now. We're just, yeah.
So would you agree then, until we can change, until we can have this default farming that you guys are just suggesting? Okay. So is that suggestion saying until we can have the kind of farming that you're suggesting or saying is ethical, does that mean you as a debate team would wait until those options are there to eat it?
I'd like to just respond to this. Again, 99%, we said 99%, but I just told you that I eat meat in a way that does not include factory farming. So, no, it does not. You can say that, I mean, okay, can you, like, show me, I guess. But anyway. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so the point I'm making here is that, it is, for example, we talked about the fish farms. I mean, how many of you have gone, like, fishing? Like, again, you're going to eat less fish if, let's say, you rely on, going out in the boat and catching a fish, and then, you kill it yourself. That's much different than the fish farms that Bruce was referring to. So it's not, and the consumer is the one who drives the market.
All right, right quick. Action for right now. Here's what happens. All 20,000 of us stop eating meat right now. You know what happens? That's right, farmers lose their job. It's not that we cure the environment all of a sudden.
I think
hold on.
more research on the industry.
I mean, for any industry, any radical change is going to have radical consequences.
Can I just...
Okay, hold on, please. There are gargantuan silos of corn, right? Do you know what the rest of the corn is used for? It's used for feeding the animals. So if we get rid of the animals, what happens? We have even more gargantuan silos of corn. Now, we're not saying that, look, just because there are gargantuan silos of corn subsidizing our corn industry, we have to keep eating meat and keep supporting factory farms. We're saying perhaps there's a gradual decline and eventually gets to this point. Eating little meat is better than eating no meat because of the reason we've stated.
So I oftentimes find myself on the hot seat at these things. It's a little strange to find somebody else on the hot seat at these things. But, yeah, and on a couple of occasions when ag students were, like, shouting me down, somebody has, like, stepped in and said, you know, he didn't interrupt the debate team when they were talking, and I feel like this might be a time to do that in the reverse. So I think the opening about civility was really nice and good, and I just really appreciate all of you putting so much time into thinking about the issues and studying the issues and preparing so thoroughly. I think it's fantastic. And, so.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, I see a bunch of hands. So if you guys want to, how many? 2 more questions? So I'm sorry, we only have 2 more questions. I've seen.
One for each side?
We'll do 1 for each side. So if you have a question for PETA and Bruce, raise your hand. All right, so this is going to be difficult. I saw your hand raised the whole time, so.
Okay. I assume that you think pesticides are, pesticides kill animals.
Yes.
Okay. And we use pesticides to grow crops. And if we don't use pesticides to grow crops, then we won't have sufficient amount of crops to grow for the whole population of the earth.
So Monsanto says.
I mean, if you can't do that, then more people will die from hunger, which is definitely, according to...
There are multiple Nobel Peace Prize winners who disagree with you, and a lot of scientists. The people who make a lot of money on pesticides are right on the same page, though.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to shut you down, but I mean, I do fundamentally disagree with the premise of your question. But I actually did want to chime in on the discussion that was happening earlier, just to say that, while we do all agree that factory farming is wrong, and I do think that the debate, you know, the ethics of this debate was intended, or at least I thought was intended, you know, since most people eat meat, I thought it was reasonable to say that, you know, I'm arguing against what most people do. But I think I did spend a significant amount of time on the hypothetical. You know, there is no way to raise animals in a way that they are less polluting than eating crops or less energy intensive than eating crops. And also on the argument about, you know, should we kill them if we don't have to? Even in the utopia where Joel Salatin is allowed to slaughter mammals on his farm and the animals actually are treated well. Like, for the same reason most people intuitively understand we don't kill dogs and cats, and you wouldn't kill an animal who you named, I would say that, you know, that shows our empathy with other animals, and that's the, you know, feeling that we should go with.
I would kill them.
Okay.
Okay, we have one more question for the ethics bowl team. All right.
Okay, so you guys propose that we can eat less meat, and I want to know, my question is kind of twofold. How do you expect us to do that with the millions of people in the country who do consume meat? And I heard you bring up, like, just, you know, raise less animals for killing, but the demand is still very high. So if you have supply very low, and you're talking about economics, people losing their jobs, then the price of meat is going to go up based on demand and low supply. And then the people who, by your standards, need meat for iron and things like that because they can't afford supplements, still won't be able to afford meat. So how do you propose you fix that?
How do we propose that we get people to cut down on meat? Well, how does Bruce and PETA and everyone propose that we get people to stop eating meat altogether? Through education, through going and talking to people about them and getting them to change their mind. It's a similar process, except we're not trying to get them to give up meat altogether for the reasons that we stated, because we believe that meat, eaten responsibly, eaten in responsible amounts, is a good thing. And so we would go and we would educate people in much the same way, except instead of educating them like, okay, go vegan, we'd say, okay, don't eat at McDonald's, don't eat at KFC, but maybe buy a pound of grass-fed steak a week. That's what I like to buy. I buy meat from Trader Joe's. I make sure it has the grass-fed label on it. And I don't eat it every day. I eat it more like once a week. And so that's how we would propose we get people to cut down. And
I just want to, before we close, thank the Ethics Bowl team and also the Michigan Animal Rights Society for sponsoring this event. I think you guys did a great job, so thank you. If you are not a member of the Michigan Animal Rights Society, I hope you will sign up in the back. If you are not a vegetarian, I hope you'll watch the video at meat.org, either one, the Alec Baldwin or the Paul McCartney one, and give it a lot more thought. But also thank you, all of you, for spending time on, well, it's a little cold. It's not exactly a lovely day, but thank you for spending your couple of hours this way. And I'm happy to hang out for a little while longer and chat if people have unresolved questions. But thank you guys, and thanks all of you.
So just one final thought to conclude before everyone goes home. When I introduced, I told the story about my roommate who came back from class, the first day of classes, and said that he hated one of his classes because his teacher was crazy. He didn't agree with him at all. At the beginning of this semester, I ran into him again on the streets of Ann Arbor, the lovely streets of Ann Arbor. I said, "Hey, Matt, how you doing?" You know, small talk for a little bit, and I asked him, "How are your classes this semester? How are your professors?" And he said, "Zach, I don't agree with any single one of my professors, and that's why I love those classes." So I hope throughout this 2-hour discussion that we had, some of you have heard different viewpoints, some of you have heard crazy viewpoints, some of you have heard things you don't necessarily agree with, but in hearing those other sides and hearing those different opinions, I hope you solidified your own stance on that issue, on this issue, and go out to the University of Michigan world and continue these discussions in a civil manner. So thank you again to the Center for Ethics in Public Life for helping put on this event. If you're interested in joining the Michigan Ethics Bowl team, I've been informed that there's a couple of seniors graduating and they need spots to fill. So please feel free to continue asking questions to them afterwards, and also I'm sure PETA will be responsive to questions as well. So thank you again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your days.